So what is your field?
I teach international politics at Columbia University, and I work on international security affairs. So war and peace, empires, nationalism.
Can you describe how was your field when you started?
None of us predicted the end of the Cold War. All of us thought that the Soviet Union would be quite stable. We all thought that the Soviet Union was not an efficient peer competitor of the United States, especially those of us who did our dissertation research in Moscow and saw Soviet society close up. We realized that it was, something like a third world country with nuclear weapons, but we didn't expect them to collapse the way they did, and we certainly didn't expect the whole business of nuclear deterrence to be revoked by Gorbachev's new thinking. So that was all a huge surprise to us.
But the field itself, could you predict the way political science changed?
Well, my field of international security affairs changed a lot as a result of the end of the Cold War, which coincided with the decline in international crises between the great powers, the decline in international wars as the focus of interest for people who studied armed violence in the world. So by the early 1990s, ethnic conflict and civil wars was pretty much the only game in town, except for the occasional international military intervention. And so a lot of us switched from the international security topics we had been studying to studying nationalism, ethnic conflict, and civil war.
Do you see progress in international relations in the field?
Progress in the conceptual and methodological sophistication in the field. That back when I started, international security affairs was a field that was descriptive and policy oriented with a little bit of theoretical work pasted on the top of it. Some of us at that time thought that we were improving the concepts and methods in the field by doing more rigorous comparative case study work that was oriented towards theoretical hypotheses. But that's now become the norm and also become surpassed in methodological sophistication and self-awareness by people who were studying civil wars, doing amazing research that includes like surveys in war zones, analyzed with sophisticated statistical methods, and doing field experiments that provide controlled tests of treatments that affect the nature of conflict on outcomes. It's amazing what people are doing nowadays that we just didn't even imagine from a methodological and scientific standpoint back in my era. On the other hand, I think it's also true that some fields of international relations have regressed. So, for example, in the field of international political economy, that was, when I was in graduate school, a new field that had been just recently going through its formulation of its central theoretical concepts. And they were talking about exciting, big ideas, explaining big trends in history, and applying them to current issues like the decline of American hegemony, and would that affect the patterns of international economic cooperation. And it was really interesting, even for people like me who were in security studies, not in political economy. But a lot of that work was qualitative and historical and theoretical. And now a lot of the work in the political economy field is extremely sophisticated in a narrow methodological way, but has lost its sense of tackling the big issues.
So what is the future of your field?
Well, I think that international relations is a field that's driven by a couple of contradictory trends. One of them is political events. So, you know, the end of the Cold War, the rise of the human rights movement, the September 11 terrorist attacks. All of these things have given rise to literatures in my field that have been kind of following the headlines. On the other hand, the other trend that's been happening is professionalization, where people are getting more rigorously trained in methodologies and methodological tools, professional standards for the use of these tools, and the immersion in theoretical questions and debates as opposed to real world so what kinds of issues has pulled things in the other direction. And so it's therefore hard to predict which of these two countervailing trends will prevail.
And as a professor and a researcher, how do you see the future of academia globally?
Well, I think that academia is going through a phase where it's internationalizing, where students are going to other countries to be educated, and where scholars are increasingly aware of the need to have transnational cooperation in order to have deep understanding of the subjects that they study. We saw this at the Social Science Research Council, where some time ago there was a shift from the old area studies model, where scholars from first world countries would become experts in developing countries or countries with strange and alien cultures, and they would go there kind of as anthropologists to study the natives, and then they would come home and write up what they learned, and they would interact with the locals kind of as if they were anthropological subjects. About, I don't know, I would say 15 years ago, there was a shift from that old model to the new model, which is where scholars from different countries collaborate on thematic topics where they're both at a high level of knowledge and training, and they're exchanging expertise on a more equal basis. So that trend is not completed, but that's the direction I think that things are going.
And what is, according to you, the model for education? And is there a model for the education of the future?
I think that I'm a product of, and I've been immersed in the American model, which gives me a certain perspective, but I think the American model has proved itself to be a good one, not necessarily the good one, but American higher education is definitely one of the areas where the United States seems to have a comparative advantage. And the model there is broad general education at the undergraduate level, where people are trained in the humanities and sciences and social sciences in a comprehensive way that gives them a lot of very general cultural capital that is with them for the rest of their life, and then later they move into the more professionalized phase of their training, and they become highly professionalized in the skill that they're going to be using, not for their first job, but for their first few jobs, whether it's academic training or professional training like law or medicine or business, where there's a premium on rigorous conceptualization, technical skills, but also placing the knowledge in a context of practical application. So I don't know, that's kind of general, but I think that's what we've been doing. I see that model working well in the US institutions that I know, and I think it's increasingly being emulated by the successful institutions abroad. And so I expect that model to be rolling along, more or less, as it is, and globally expanding in the foreseeable future.
Do you think that disciplines will be more and more specialized?
The disciplines in at least social science and humanities have not changed their level of specialization. I mean, the disciplines are essentially the same ones now as there were 60 years ago. The content of the disciplines is, evolving, of course, but the disciplines are basically the same. The degree of specialization within the disciplines is perhaps a little bit greater now than it had been, not so much with respect to subject matters, but with respect to niche methodological competences. But I think that for a long time the trajectory of specialization was that when people were young, they tended to be more narrow, more specialized, and as they got older, they broadened out and became more generalists. And exactly what that looked like 50 years ago is a little bit different than what it looks like today, but I think that's still the major pattern, where people who are at a high level of competence and maturity in their discipline are pretty broad today, just like they were 50 years ago. So it's like the old joke about the specialists knowing more and more about less and less until they know everything about nothing. And with generalists, it's the opposite. So we're still doing that.